Welcome to EdTech Talk, where we dive deep into the dynamic world of educational technology, course design, and feature faculty insights in higher education. I'm your host, Joy Ray, and in this episode, we are joined with Erica McMahon and Brittany McLeod from our Accessibility Resources Department. Today, we'll be discussing accessibility in higher education. So thank you guys so much for being with me today and talking about accessibility. Before we get started, I would love it if you guys could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. Erica, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you for having us here today. As Joy mentioned, my name is Erica McMahon. I've been with the college for 7 years in this role as an accessibility resources counselor and director most recently. Prior to coming to Forsyth Tech, I worked with the state vocational rehab agency for 10 years. And before that, I was working in various other roles, all related to working with people with disabilities. So I have my master's in rehabilitation counseling, which is specifically for working with individuals with disabilities.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Brittany, what about yourself?
So my name is Brittany McLeod. I have been at Forsyth Tech for a year and a half now, as an accessibility counselor. Prior to coming into higher education, I was a middle school EC resource inclusion teacher, where my focus was working with students with disabilities in the public school system. I have my master's degree in teaching with a concentration in special education. So all of the work that I've done professionally has been with this specific population as well.
We have such wonderful knowledge with you guys, so I'm so excited to go ahead and dive into this topic. I think we can all agree that accessibility in education and everywhere is extremely important, to meet students where they're at, as well as to meet requirements that are set by law. The laws are constantly changing to become more inclusive and pushing us to have more accessibility resources available to them. So would you guys be willing to go over a little bit about the history of accessibility and how accessibility in education first got started?
So it's a pretty extensive history when it comes to looking at civil rights as well as disability rights. So we have to start with around the 1960s when the civil rights movement really began. And there was a recognition for equal access in education. So fast forward a little bit to 1973, the Rehabilitation Act came into effect, which actually prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And that's with any federally funded programs or agencies, such as community colleges, because we receive federal funding through the Pell Grant. So that kind of really started things, but it didn't really kick off, I would say, to the maximum effect until the 1990s. And that was with the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, which protects people with disabilities from discrimination in all aspects of society. So whereas the Rehab Act was just focused on those federally funded programs and agencies, the ADA was there to protect in all aspects. So employment, transportation, education, basically everything in our lives.
Yes, it's been great to see the history and how it's played out, especially with education, and then how education has moved into the online aspect. It has greatly morphed to include a lot more aspects. So what are some of the guidelines now in terms of accessibility for online or in-person or multimodal classrooms?
Great question. So accessibility does definitely touch the physical and digital space. So some of those laws that are going to cover digital accessibility specifically is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We call it WCAG as a short way of saying that very long name. And we are now focused on the 2.2 standards. So things have kind of progressed and morphed over time. So definitely focused on those guidelines, but they fall under, again, ADA and Section 504. Section 508 focuses more of like the digital space of the the Rehabilitation Act. So, these guidelines are going to protect things such as websites, mobile apps, social media, learning management systems that we use, thinking about kiosk and ATMs. All of these things are going to be covered under laws that we have now and the new regulations that are coming out into 2026 as well.
I think that's very interesting. In my previous position, I started there as a quality assurance person, and it was a brand new position, and they're like, you need to create a rubric. And on that rubric, you need to talk about accessibility. And they're like, we don't have anything about it. Figure it out. And I had to learn the WCAG 2.0 standards. So it's interesting to see just how those have morphed and changed from the time that I started doing accessibility things for the company there. So it's very interesting. So what does accessibility look like in action?
So what does accessibility look like in action? There's a lot of different ways that it can look. So thinking about the physical space, so ensuring that individuals don't have to seek out accommodations. It's things that are already thought about at the forefront of planning events, putting out information. You're already considering accessibility. So whether that is closed captions, so that individuals have different ways of taking in information whenever we're presenting, making sure that we have color contrast that is, following those WCAG guidelines. So if I'm a person that has a vision impairment or has low vision, I can still access the information. Thinking about parking in those physical spaces, making sure we have enough accessible parking for individuals or signage where individuals know where things are located. So thinking about, that in the physical space, online, making sure, I think that kind of goes, again, color contrast, closed caption, but really just removing those barriers that are in place that we don't consider. We need to really consider all options, all individuals, different variability, and plan for that. So for me, that's what accessibility would look like in action, removing barriers so that all can access.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So what different types of disabilities are we trying to cover and trying to account for when teaching?
Yep. So when we're thinking about the type of disabilities, it's a pretty wide range of students that we work with. In fact, most of the students we work with have what are called invisible disabilities. So if we were just to look at them, or encounter them, we wouldn't know necessarily they have a disability. A lot of our students have learning disabilities. They're dealing with mental health concerns, physical disabilities, and maybe a little bit of everything, medical conditions that are ongoing. So when we're thinking about accommodations, it's very much an individualized process. So two students who have the same disability may not need the same accommodations. But some standard accommodations that we provide would be like taking tests in a separate setting where there's fewer distractions, being able to have extra time to take the test, maybe note-taking assistance, so recording, using technology, American Sign Language interpreters, closed captionings, accessible seating for persons who use wheelchairs, that sort of thing.
It's interesting to think about all the different possibilities that there are and how each person is unique. We're all unique and can learn in different ways. And so I really appreciate that. So what are some challenges that we face and other people face when trying to create accessible content and trying to meet these needs of students?
I would say the most common challenge that we encounter, especially with our digital content, is accessible documents. It's actually pretty simple to check accessibility when you're using the Microsoft Office products. Most of these errors can be fixed, can be checked and fixed within just a few minutes by running that checker that's automatically in the software. And depending on the document length, of course. But specifically, we run into images that don't have alt text, inaccessible hyperlinks, so meaning that, it's the full http:// blah, 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 that's really lengthy and doesn't really tell people where that link is going. Lack of like the built-in features with list and numbering and tables, that sort of thing. Those are the most common challenges I think we've seen.
And would you mind, for those that might not be familiar, would you mind talking about alt text and kind of what that is?
Yeah. So anytime that we're using an image or a graphic, for someone who does not have vision, and they're using a screen reading software, when it comes to that image, it's not going to necessarily tell them what it is unless you provide an alt text. So the alt text is actually a description of the image or the graph or whatever it is that is in the document. For example, instead of just coming up to an image and it says, this is an image, whatever the computer says, it would specifically say, image of two people sitting at a desk looking at a computer, or whatever the case might be. So just a very specific description of that, a short description. If it was anything longer, you would want to provide some sort of text, like footnote for the image.
Yeah, I had to help people write long descriptions for science images specifically. Those are ones that can get very, very complicated very easily. So it's kind of fun and almost challenging to write those, I think, though. And they definitely push you outside of what you're used to be able to make those. I used to test with the NVDA screen reader. It's a free screen reader that you could put on your computer to kind of test out things. What's nice is you can hit a single key to go through all the headers, so you know the headers, and you can also do the same thing for links. And that's one reason why having those specific names, telling them where that link is going so that they know it's not just click here, it describes what they're clicking on and what they're trying to get. So those things are great. What tools and technologies do you use to test or create accessible content?
Awesome. Before I answer that question, I kind of want to speak to the alt text conversation and kind of going back to the WCAG guidelines, making sure that the information is perceivable. So no matter what I'm using, whether it's a screen reader, Braille, no matter what my disability is, I need to be able to access that content. So without alt text, I am not able to access the content, which at that point could breed a lot of other issues. I'm being excluded from the participation in, and I'm not getting that equal access, that same opportunity to the content. So I think that is very important. To speak to your question about tools and technologies that we use to create and test for accessibility, the main thing that I would say is humans are the best accessibility testers. A lot of the professional development that I have attended, they encourage individuals to have individuals with disabilities to be a part of this testing so that they are the ones that are using the software. So what better way to have a person with the disability test the software? So I would definitely say that's like number one. Microsoft Office products do have the built-in accessibility feature, and it is an effortless way to check your documents' accessibility from PowerPoints to emails and much more. It will run an accessibility checker, and then it will give you errors and suggestions. So those errors are things that absolutely have to be fixed. And sometimes it'll even walk you through how to fix it or what specifically needs to be changed in your document. Other times they'll provide you suggestions and say, hey, this may cause an accessibility issue, maybe not. So just encouraging just to fix it anyways. Adobe and Foxit also have built-in accessibility checkers. We have found that PDFs are not as easy to make accessible compared to Word documents, so it may take a little bit more time and effort when working with PDFs, but it can be done. It is also helpful to use free screen reading resources such as VoiceOver, NVDA, as you mentioned, Joy, so that you are manually testing this and you're able to kind of have that firsthand experience of an individual that may be blind or visually impaired, have processing disorders and things like that. You're actually able to put yourself in that space and using that assistive technology.
And I just want to add one thing that, having these accessibility features are not only beneficial for persons with disabilities, but also for students who maybe English is their second language. A lot of these things can be used for those students as well. So it's, again, about access for all.
I love the inclusivity that accessibility brings. I always go back to like the ramp situation of just physical spaces and getting somewhere. It wasn't a big deal to me until I had kids, and then I had to push a stroller up, and I was like, there's no ramp. I can't get up these stairs, or I have to walk far away just to get to the ramp. And the same goes for the options inside the courses in terms of contrast. Don't use yellow, you can't see it. It makes it difficult. And being able to listen to things. If you are not have the ability to read it at a certain point, you could be able to listen to that content and still get it. And it's beneficial for anyone and everyone. It's great.
So Joy, your comment just made me think about the framework universal design. So what you spoke about, creating access for all, no matter disability, age, gender, social status, removing those barriers and giving everybody the opportunity, the curb cut effect. So as you mentioned, mothers can use, whenever we think about a curb, everybody can kind of access that space. It's not specifically for individuals with disabilities or wheelchair users. Delivery men can use that space. Mothers with children can use that curb cut. People riding skateboards and bicycles and carrying luggage and things like that. We're providing access to all. So when we design things for everyone, everyone benefits.
Yes. I know a lot of people can get overwhelmed by that thought. And what I like to do, it's an iterative process to me. Like you make something and then you continue to morph it and change it, and you continue to change it for the better. It's not going to be perfect the first time you create something, right? But slowly, as the ball keeps rolling, it gets smoother and smoother and helps more and more people. So I also know we use things like Blackboard Ultra. There's an accessibility report in Blackboard Ultra that you could pull to figure out how accessible content within your courses. It kind of does a quick overview of images to make sure you have alt tags, as well as the look at documents to make sure you have headings. Also, we have Echo 360, which generates captions for videos that you create. And if you guys utilize CourseArc, if you use one of the interactive features, it often generates a alternative activity for someone else who might not be able to utilize that activity, but they're still getting that same information. So a lot of these programs that we use have ways to help us to make it simpler for us, which is great. So what role do you think accessibility plays in promoting equity and inclusion in education?
Yeah, it's a great question. So many of us think about the diversity, equity, and inclusion at DEI. And oftentimes I want to remind folks that add that A onto the acronym, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. I think those are all essential for any organization. So these are the practices focusing on, of course, representing people from a large group. It could be, again, socioeconomic backgrounds, disabilities, ages, gender, everything that we've talked about, making sure that we're representing everyone equally. And these practices are also going to publicly represent an organization's to their actions, represent that their actions and services are based on the community's needs and desired outcomes for those individuals.
Brittany, do you have anything you want to share too?
Sure. I think that accessibility plays a role to promote DEI in a number of ways. Promoting awareness, focusing on it from the start, being proactive versus reactive, cultivating a diverse workplace. I definitely think that focusing on accessibility, it creates a culture shift amongst colleges, amongst in education, within yourself. So definitely keeping that at the forefront. It helps create a culture of inclusivity as opposed to a reactive practice. Something happened and now we're going to jump and make a change, as opposed to soon as the conversation starts, soon as something is brought to the table, how can we make this accessible? I definitely think being a part of the conversation, or, our office bringing that lens is definitely important, and how it plays a role in promoting that equity, inclusion. Those are all the things that accessibility, those principles stand on. So I definitely think, like Erica said, don't forget that A, because it goes right with it.
Yes, it's fun to see that shift when you're part of it from the beginning, of learning how to educate people about accessibility and making things more inclusive, and then seeing them start to think about it before. And it takes time to make that shift. But once it happens and you see that progress start happening, it's really, really exciting. And it soon becomes second nature, right?
Yeah.
Because you get used to it, and it's the things that first pop into your head when you start doing things. Do you guys have any success stories that you can share of seeing how it has helped students when they are utilizing these tools?
So I think it's hard to just name one. We have so many students that come through our office that are successful now in college and beyond. Several students come to mind. There was a student with sickle cell disease and vision loss who successfully completed her program despite numerous setbacks. So working with our office, working with their instructors to increase access, definitely helped that student. A quadriplegic student that relies on assistive technology and various accommodations was able to complete their program of study, resources, campus-wide support, and that culture shift. There's instructors definitely willing to work with the student and be open. You talked about being open and learning. I think that's very important in breeding success. And then a young man with autism that completed an associate's degree and graduated high school, both with honors. So there's a lot of cheering that we can do for our students. We recently created a club here at Forsyth Tech called Trailblazers Dream. DREAM stands for Disability Rights, Education, Activism, and Mentoring. So definitely giving our students with disabilities and their allies here at Forsyth Tech a place of leadership, a place where they can really work to promote change here at Forsyth Tech. So there's a lot of great things that are happening, from our programming to just raising awareness at different centers. A lot of things around accessibility are happening here at Forsyth Tech, and we are very, very excited about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of great things happening. Erica, did you want to add anything?
I'll just add that talking about the club that Brittany started for us, actually, it gives students a voice. So many times, again, looking at those students who maybe have invisible disabilities, they don't necessarily get a chance to share the needs and the struggles that they have. And this is an area for them to have a voice to do so.
Mm-hmm. It's important to feel heard in the things that you're doing. All right. So last question, what advice would you give educators who are starting to focus on accessibility in teaching? What is an actionable item that they can take to start implementing now to be more successful?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, Joy, accessibility is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done kind of thing. So we have to be responsible in all of our different areas that we work in. So it's not just the accessibility office's responsibility or, the CTLE or, whoever. It's all of our responsibilities. So as far as things that educators can do to start focusing on accessibility, obviously you're going to want to be familiar with universal design, supporting diverse learning styles that way. Using alt text and image descriptions, which we've already spoke to, that's really important. Making sure that all of our videos have captions. If you upload your video to YouTube, for example, it'll automatically create captions, and as well as the Echo 360 that you mentioned. Ask students. So, without calling out students who maybe have an obvious disability, just ask students in general for feedback. What would make things easier for them to access? What kind of options would they like to have as far as alternative assignments, that sort of thing? And of course, reach out to our department if you need guidance, if you have any questions, we're always happy to help in any way possible. And use those built-in accessibility checkers.
And I'll just kind of speak to that. I definitely think that taking advantage of professional development opportunities that you guys put on, that our office puts on, is a small action. Getting the information, asking those questions makes a ton of difference. Watching the YouTube videos, this is my little shameless plug. Erica and I have created several videos on accessibility, universal design, and things of such. This podcast, so definitely just take all the information that is being presented to you, be a sponge, and like she said, ask questions. We're always here to support you guys.
Thank you so much for the knowledge that you guys have shared, and I just get excited about talking about this and all the different resources that are out there and learning it all. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you for who's joined us on this episode of EdTech Talk. Tune in next time for more insights, discussions, and inspirations in the world of higher education. Until then, keep on leading and learning. Thank you.
Thank you.